The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Dave Patterson. I'll be the moderator today for today's webinar on building your sponsorship program. Before we get into the content today, I'm just going to quickly go over a few things about the tool that we're using, our GoToWebinar tool, to make sure you have everything you need to enjoy the webinar today. First of all, everyone who's joined us as a participant today, thank you, welcome. You are muted. This allows us to avoid any barking dogs or baristas in the background. If you need to ask us a question though, over on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a participant panel. You can write in the chat window or in the question pane. When we get those questions in, I'll ask those on your behalf of our presenters, and we do want to hear from you. Next, you're able to see us here on video, the three of us right now, and throughout the course of the session, you'll see the three of us at different times. Don't worry, we cannot see you. You can only see us. And with that sort of technical piece out of the way, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Jean Edworthy. Dr. Edworthy is the member of the COC Board of Directors and the chair of the Revenue Generation and Marketing Committee. Jean, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second season of our marketing and revenue generation webinars that are put on by the Canadian Olympic Committee through our National Sport Federation Enhancement Initiative. This year we're looking forward to digging deeper into topics that we touched on last year and broadening the base of knowledge that we can transmit on to the National Sport Federation through the use of world-class presenters like our guest today, Dr. Norm O'Reilly. We're very happy to have Norm with us. Norm, many of you know, is a leading researcher in the field of sponsorship. He is a professor out of Ohio University, but he has great Canadian connections, having worked with Sport Canada, Triathlon Canada, been a board member with Diving Canada. He's authored 7 books, many peer-reviewed papers, and he's also the lead author on the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, which he's going to be referencing in his presentation today. One of the things that we're going to be doing this year in our second season is we're going to be doing some case studies and representing some of the actual projects that our national sport federations have been funded for in the field of marketing and revenue generation through the NSF Enhancement Initiative. And one of those projects is one with Diving Canada, and we're very happy to have Penny Joyce, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Diving Canada, with us today as well, and she will be picking Norm's brain a little bit about where to go with their project with the Fab 4. Very exciting, successful program that Diving Canada has had, and I look forward to hearing more about that from Penny. So we'll talk a little bit more about the ongoing webinars at the end of this program, but for the moment, let's get to the meat of the matter, and Norm, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Right. Thanks, Gene. Thanks, and thanks, Dave, for setting this up again. So the plan for today, as Gene kind of outlined, is to dig deeper into sponsorship, and I guess it's a good sign. I've been invited back after doing one last year. So what we're doing is really building on what we did last year. So for those that haven't seen it, I know Dave shared a link and a copy, so you do have it. And this is intended to build on it based on the feedback you gave to us and a lot of the data we've learned in about the last 11 months in sponsorship and what's changing, particularly in Canada. So we'll dig into that. So we're going to review what we did very quickly last time with some updated stats, and then really focus on the tactical aspects of building out your plan and what that looks like, what kind of things you can put in, and what you can do tomorrow. You may recall last year was a lot about is sponsorship for you. This is now looking at, well, sponsorship is in a situation for you. What do you do? And as mentioned, Penny's going to jump in, and we're going to have a nice discussion, and then we'll have a wrap-up and some Q&A at the end. So next slide, Dave.
And Norm, if I can just jump in quickly, we are going to cover a lot of ground today, including some fairly data-heavy slides. Over in that right-hand pane for everybody, you can download the presentation deck right there. So you can have a PDF of this. So if you find that we go through something maybe a little faster, you will have it to reference later on.
All right, so just to get started, the goal for today is to really, as we mentioned, dig into the tactical details around those themes of servicing, evaluation, and activation for a sponsorship program. Next. So just to give you a quick feedback from what we did last year. So this is our plan from last year. The two areas highlighted in red are what we really look like. So it was under the whole theme of revenue generation, and we dug into the two marketing areas, one, your traditional sponsorship, and two, the idea of public-private partnerships. Next, please. And so this was all under this idea, and both of these worked. So it's really engaging corporations, Canadian brands, to put dollars and resources and services and products that are going to help you achieve your business goals. And this is really based on this kind of revenue virtuous cycle. We spent a lot of time going through these things and a lot of the positive financial and non-financial outcomes that can happen if you get this kind of partnership. So that's just a quick refresher. Next, please. We dug in as well to both how sponsorship works and then how public-private partnerships work. This captured very quickly how sponsors think. And the idea is at the bottom, the consumer sees both the sponsor and the property's images, and through the activations we do, transfers them. We went through a number of case studies last year to show, and there's a lot of empirical research to show this is how sponsorship works when it's effective for your partner in achieving the goals that they want to achieve. Next. And in the case of the public-private partnership, you can see here it's similar to sponsorship in the idea that it's engaging corporate dollars, but it falls further down the continuum between a pure corporate investment for ROI return and then a pure philanthropic corporate donation. It's in between. So a great example there is participation in Coca-Cola's ongoing programs. They've had Team Challenge and So Go Active. And this is where there's definitely an ROI, a business objective to achieve from the brand, but also they're looking to support a cause that they believe in and a cause that's going to help us view them and their reputation and their images differently. So it's still very similar to sponsorship in that it's got a business element to it, but it moves down the criteria. And if you recall from last year, for those that were there, the real advantage, well, who cares? Well, the thing is, this is a different offering that we have as NSOs for corporations that is a different decision set. If they're purely deciding to invest for reach or brand or sales benefits, often we as an NSO can't compete with much larger professional sport or arts or culture or music kind of properties. And similarly, on a pure corporate philanthropy side, when people are giving their donations, it's hard for us to pull those donation dollars away from things like cancer and diabetes, whereas this kind of fits us in between where we get that bit of a mix and they're drawing from different budgets on the corporate side. And next, please. So then an update on last year. So as Jean mentioned, the landscape study was now done its 9th year. I'm going to go through these very quickly. They're all available. The study is shared for free, as most of you know. You can go get it. I believe Dave shared the link, both in English and Francais, and you can grab it. So here's the response. Over the last 9 years, we've had upwards of 2,500 Canadian respondents, both sponsors, brands, properties, events, NSOs of all types, not just sports, across the board, and the agencies that work for both properties and help broker these deals or sell sponsorships or evaluate them, etc. We get all of those feedback as we work our way through. Next, please. That's the data we're going to draw on for the next little bit. So what we found this year, and so if you haven't seen us present it since, this is kind of what's happened. And so we've seen an continued increasing within sponsorship budgets for Canadian brands. So brands are spending more and more, a larger percentage. We saw a little blip there after the recession in 2009, but an increasing, so about a quarter, 1 in every 4 Canadian marketing communications dollars is being spent on sponsorship-related activities. Next. In terms of the overall size, and this is something that people like to follow each year, we've seen an ongoing growth since we first started this study nearly a decade ago from 1.1 billion. And this is what's spent on rights fees, not total spend. We'll share that in a second, but rights fees. So for the first time in the history of the study, we saw a significant retraction in the overall spend. Still the second highest number recorded, but down from 2013. So the recession, we're officially in a recession right now in Canada. A lot of challenges with the economy. Organizations are pulling back on what they're spending, and that this fits with other studies that we've seen. That's affecting sponsorship as well. And you can see the outlook for 2015 is not all that positive across sponsors, properties, and agencies. Next, please. Geographic focus. All I wanted to say here, and this was a big theme last year, is we actually saw an increase. And so those that continue to think that only the NHL and the COC and the Grey Cup get sponsors are wrong. It's a really, really becoming a local and regional focused thing. So this really plays into our hands as organizations like you all are in terms of activating events and your membership at PSO level, et cetera, is a local, regional, provincial feel for well over half of that $1.6 billion spent every year. Next. In terms of the category, the largest sponsor. So this is a question we always ask, and you could equate this to your title sponsor or your most important gold level sponsor, whatever categorization or sponsorship structure you're using. We saw a big shift, and that's the one at the top in the middle. The communications companies had risen to the top in terms of what we learned were property's largest sponsors. So still coming from retail, still coming from finance and the other areas you see, but a big jump in the communications companies investing in sponsorship. So it's a category you don't have, it's one to look at, and it's certainly a group that's looking at sponsorship to spend. And so it's just not the banks, there's lots of places you can, and in terms of the largest one, we're seeing more and more of that. Next. This slide we really like, and this is a slide that captures both that $1.66 billion I mentioned before and the activation dollars. So you can see that green line at the top, that's in billions, the total amount estimated that Canadian corporations are spending in sponsorship, both rights fees plus activation dollars and activation spend. So this is where you can see with that decreased activation and the slight decrease in overall spend, a retraction in the amount of money that's in sponsorship last year in Canada, which is a reality. Next. In terms of by area, and this is always important to us, and so as Jean mentioned, I think up front, this is a study that looks at all of sponsorship in its entirety, and we can see a real return of professional sport. And this is something that is something for us to be really aware of. I mean, professional sport had seen a decrease in the late 2000s, and the NHL would be a prime example. The CFL is a prime example. They've really, really upped the ante in terms of their sponsorship programs, how they deliver on them. We, people like me, researchers, used to chastise professional sport for poor use of sponsorship or overemphasis on rink boards and signage. That has changed. They're creating their own events, they're doing their own properties, they're activating their brands and their celebrity players, down the list you go. So a lot of the dollars that for the first time in a while are starting to shift back to professional sport in terms of the percentage of the marketing mix there versus other areas. Something to be aware of. The next slide also talks about the same theme as we get into how you do that, and that's today's webinar. And so you can see where we did last time with our little structure, just reviewed it, you saw the changes that are happening, and around these pieces that the NHL, the CFL, and the Grey Cup, COC are now doing really good jobs, we need to do as well. And so this is around these three groupings of servicing, activation, and evaluation. So the real idea here is we're taking the view that, and some of you may be in this situation, some may not be ready, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was the first webinar. But here we're taking the assumption that you have gotten to the point where a sponsor is interested in you. And so maybe you've just signed one, maybe you've got an expression of interest, you've got the agent of someone talking, I'll talk about the pathways in a second. You're at that point where you're now building out that program either at the really high interest, high potential proposal level, or you've actually signed a sponsorship and you're going to implement it. So that's the focus for the rest of the webinar today. Next, please. So, as I kind of mentioned, there's some pathways that you got here. And so just, I mean, some weren't in the previous webinar last year, or maybe you're newer to sponsorship. You got here, and it's not easy. So this is almost a bit of a summary of some of the takeaways from last year. And so one, you've built some assets. So you've got something that they want to invest in. Huge problem for a lot of NSOs. You have a partner that's interested or someone that might be, they look at you, you don't even know they're looking at you. Sponsorship has really changed. The RFPs are disappearing. They're pre-selecting on their research. You don't have a national championships that you own. You don't have access to your athletes. You don't have your own events that you can leverage. There's not much they can do. You don't have a lot of assets. So you're at the pathway where you have some assets, things they can build their programs around, things that they can activate on. Second, you've got some leverageability. That's a term that's not a real English word, but we kind of made it up when we were making this deck. And it's around that you're structured so that you can offer your partner the ability to do their activation. So you've got people on your team. You've got account management, account planners. You've got someone who can help do this. You're set up to help your partner activate their sponsorship or their public-private partnership. And the last one, you've built that a relationship, and that could come from your own personal efforts or the efforts of your agencies. That could come from the efforts of their agencies or an RFP that they've put forward and they've connected with you. But at some level, you've informally or formally built a relationship, so there's interest, there's assets, and there's leverageability. So we're through that, and for the rest of the webinar, we're talking about we're now either building out a very specific proposal for a highly interested party, or we've got a signed deal and we want to make sure it works. Next. So here's the three themes. I've mentioned this, but just high level, and we've got an appendix at the end for those that want to download the deck of some of these specific items around servicing. So one is servicing. So have you delivered on your promises? Have you met their expectations? So both the formal and the informal. We'll talk a lot about that in a second and how we're really not doing a very good job. Secondly is activation. Have both parties invested? One of the things we're really learning about effective sponsorships and best practices in sponsorship is that both parties are significantly putting time and resources towards making sure it works. And then evaluation. Are you measuring? We know most of you aren't. We know most sponsorships in Canada are not at any significant level. And this is one thing we have to do, and we'll talk about how you can do that today. So those are the three themes. Next, please, Dave. So servicing. So first, we're going to draw on the Canadian Sponsorship Landscape Study, and that's going to be a theme throughout because we're picking up on those things that we're learning. So from some background research a long time ago and ongoing, there's 9 major areas in which we look at servicing that sponsors are interested in. Can they do their activation? Are they getting the data and the statistics they want? Are they getting access to other sponsors for co-sponsor? Are you helping them activate? Are you giving them a platform they can do what they want to do? Does your target market match with theirs, and are you showing them that? Can you protect them against ambushers? Can you protect their exclusivity? This is in that appendix that I mentioned, all the specific definitions if you should want to see them. We're going to focus on those. And now into the next one, and this is something we do every year, is to measure the different expenditures and the different service elements that both sides are doing. And the great thing about the landscape studies, we get views from sponsors, we get views from properties, and we can kind of look at both of them. So first, in terms of cash versus value in kind, or some of you may call it contra, or product or service elements in sponsorship, we've seen an ongoing trend across the country over the last 7 or 8 years of a decline in this. And so there's certainly a huge opportunity for organizations like us to have more interest. We're all so focused on cash, but value in kind and contra sponsorship in the right categories, in the right situation, is much easier for the sponsor to give away, the brand to give away, which we hear a lot, and is also something that in certain cases often we need, and particularly on things like the NSOs, where we tend to get interest from sponsors who have a link to our sport or our type of sport, whether it's an energy drink or whether it's clothing or whether it's equipment, and this is ones where the equipment is of high value. Don't forget that across the country we are. The second one then links back to, if you go to the next one, Dave.
Norm, I have a quick question for you about VIK. And one thing we've heard a little bit about lately, or maybe emerging a bit, is around VIK being provided, for lack of a better term, from the back of house. So we'll loan you our IT department for a couple of days, that kind of thing. So not necessarily equipment or that stuff that they're providing up front, but some capabilities they have as a corporation. Are you seeing any of that as a trend?
Yeah, a great point. I mean, I've seen examples, and I'll mention a couple now, but certainly not enough that we'd like to see, and certainly something to focus on. So, for example, and we've got a Harvard case study on the Homeless World Cup. So some of you may have heard of this event, brilliantly done thing, but a bunch of social entrepreneurs from Scotland who'd had family issues with homelessness started this. Basically, it's a World Cup, but people have to be homeless to play in it. And the whole objective is to get people back on the streets. We're all a couple of bad steps, a divorce and a lost job away from being on the street. So a lot of us can easily integrate it back, and it's been very successful. But to your point, Dave, initially they met with Nike, and Nike liked the idea. Phil Knight loved the idea, started to work with them. But that's exactly what he did. He said, you can have Nike's marketing engine. So Nike didn't give a lot of cash, but they gave the marketing machine to turn this very little, highly effective, local charity event into now a global. If you look at it in YouTube, you can see some amazing stuff. They've engaged 50 plus countries. Their effectiveness rate of getting people back into regular society and off the street is above 50%. It's really an extraordinary thing, and the main reason they were able to do that was by engaging that. The second part of the question very quickly was I've seen a few instances now of sponsors at the NSO, MSO kind of level putting offers in front of partners that have that kind of reach, whether it's a technology partner, a retail partner, a bottler partner, to bring that to the table. Action and Coca-Cola, which I mentioned earlier, great example. So Coca-Cola's got 300,000 staff and associated staff in Canada. If you can engage them in the activations, there's no way any kind of sport organization can possibly match that reach, even Hockey Canada, right? Thanks, Dave. Next, so as I was mentioning, sponsors disservice. So, and I could show you results from 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and it's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. We all think we're doing a good job of servicing our partners. The sponsors tell us year over year over year that they're not happy. So there's obviously exceptions, some people that are delivering, but Canadian sponsors, the 1,000 plus that have responded over the 9 years, are telling us exactly this. We're not delivering on those 9 key categories we talk about. Significant differences, and you can see the performance versus the expected performance data there in front of you. So if you think you're servicing at the level you should be, you might be, but I would bet that you're not in their eyes. This is an area of huge, huge importance as we go forward, and something we really need to focus on, and we'll talk about some tactics to do that in a second. Dave? So here we go. So better servicing starts today. So these are like an idea, this is a theme we have for all 3 of these, 5 things you could actually do tomorrow, assuming you're in this position of sponsors or high-level prospects. And I've been involved in a lot of sponsorship deals or preparations now with properties that are going in these directions. So one is you need to allocate up front. So when you get a potential sponsorship or sign a sponsorship, you immediately put dollars from that budget back into the sponsorship. And the range there is 3 to 20%. You could agree or disagree with me. That's the range that I've seen, and I like. There's no industry best practice really out there. It's pretty relatively new. But if it's a low impact, low important kind of sponsorship, just put a couple of bucks. If it's one you want to renew, if it's your first time with a Nike or a Coke of the world, put in the 20% and just service the heck out of it, because that's going to allow you to renew and renew at a higher level down the line. So that could be hiring somebody, that can be doing some specific servicing, that can be making sure you're adding to some of the promotions they're doing to double the effectiveness, launching a social platform around it. All those kind of things gives you budget that's allocated towards it. Second, and you saw this before, ask for VIK, even post-deal. Often the deal is signed and you've got the cash figured out. They want to activate then. They're very happy to talk about this if it's the right kind of category. So don't be shy and think about getting VIK both post or during the negotiation process. Communicate, and we hear this, you saw the study, the results there. We think we are, but they want regular communications. They may tell you they won't, but they want to know what's going on. So assign someone on your team, maybe not the head of marketing, maybe not the executive director, the CEO, but someone to take on the role of following up. Can even be a really talented intern that takes on that job to make sure there's regular communications, they're invited to everything, you didn't forget to invite them to your AGM, they're engaged, they're involved. And then make it someone's job. So as I said, when you're communicating, make sure someone has that job, that they're reporting back to you if you're the head of marketing or the executive director if that's the position you have in a smaller NSO. Make sure that person is coming back to you on a regular basis and giving you an update. And that's that internal review quarterly. So at that internal review, the last one, pull out the contract, make the list, see what needs to be done, what hasn't been delivered on. I can guarantee if you're not doing that, you're forgetting things. And the last thing you want is them to show up on race day, event day, national team photo day, whatever it is, and see something that they didn't like, signage in the wrong spot, their old logo. These things happen all the time. You may not think much about it. And they say, oh, don't worry. When they're telling us in these studies, they don't like it. And so that's very, very important, those 5 things to start thinking about right away. So now let's move on to the next one. So now we're going to talk about activation. And activation, as you know, is the extra spend on top of that. You guys all know that well. We won't spend any time on that. There's traditional activation, and now these more high-valued activations that are really driving sponsorship effectiveness traditionally and digitally. So the ratio in Canada, and this is a really disappointing slide. So there's US data at the bottom there. There's also French data from France. There's British data from Britain, and there's Australian data from Australia. I guess it's kind of silly to say that. But they're all in that 1.5-ish range too. That means for every dollar spent on rights fees, these countries' brands and sponsors are spending $1.50-ish, somewhat more, sometimes more, on activating those. We've been way behind. Ever since the start of the study, we saw some real positive things. We like to think the study had a bit of an effectiveness on that, and then we've seen a big drop. So not only did we see a bit of a retraction in the spend, less than 10%, but we saw a massive change in what's being spent on activation. And so this is not how you want to go. If your partners have less money to spend, don't squeeze the rights fees out of them. Make sure they're still activating, because when it comes time to renew, if there's no activation, it's highly unlikely that their boss is going to allow them to do that. Next. Next, please. Yeah, next. So within those, the tactics. And so when we look at activation in terms of how we spend within that dollar, so even though it's shrinking, we ask, what percentage is being spent tactic by tactic? And this is a bit of a silver lining. This is a positive finding, is that our sponsors, even though they've cut back, not good, are spending smarter. So you're seeing a bit of decline in the areas that are just buying time, online, offline signage, etc., and really focusing on experiential stuff. So branded content, that means own property. So they're building and creating things that they can activate around and partner with you to activate around. Talk about that in a second. Hosting and hospitality has creeped up and is now the number 2. Product sampling is the number 3. So those are 3 things where consumers get to experience and work with your taste, drive, eat, whatever it is, their particular products. And that's what they want. And next, please. So here we go again. So you saw a bit of a background there. So here's our 5 things you can start doing tomorrow. So the first, again, invest your revenue. Not much. This is just my view. Again, there's no industry standards here because it's relatively new. But put percentages back towards activation. And so this is something as simple as Coca-Cola is your partner or Kellogg's is your partner, whoever, and they come back to you and they say, you know what, we're going to do this program around television. We're going to do 3 spots. Hey, why don't we pay for a 4th spot for you? We've got some money set aside for that. What an amazing way to make your partner happy. So make sure you're helping them activate. And then if they're under-activating and you want to renew them because it's a significant revenue source, you've got some money to help actually make that happen. Integrate it into your packaging, integrate it into your brand, redo stuff on your website that may cost some money. You're not pulling from other places. You've pulled it out of the revenue and you've planned for that when you sign the sponsorship. Get in front of them, right? So you want to talk about activation at the very first meeting. So long before the partner has ever planned anything, have an activation meeting. And this sounds really silly, but it rarely happens, where you sit down and plan and say, here's what we can do. We're bringing 2.5% of the money back to the table. Let's plan together. Do you want to engage some of our other sponsors? What about our athletes? Here's our 17 main events this year, from our AGM to our championships to this own property we're doing, and get them engaged and activating around it. Third, don't forget that you are the platform. All properties aren't so good at this, but we in sport are often the worst, and we think that we should be sponsored, and we've got great stories, and all. I can tell you everybody's got a great story, whether it's an opera house, a youth festival, an education school program, a professional sport team. We all have great stories, and some of them are better than others, but they're all good stories. And so stories don't sell sponsorship. You need to be a platform to let them tell what they want to tell to the people that they want to reach, right? So act like that. Be open. Don't say no. Try to find ways around athlete agreements and these kind of things. It's hard, but be a platform and at least express that to them so it's open. And maybe in renewal you can figure out new ways to deliver on some of the things you weren't able to the first time. Experiences first. You heard that experiential piece I just talked about before. That's what they want to do. Give them opportunities to get in there and get their products and services in front of people and do stuff. I mean, we've seen great examples recently with the CFL and some of their partners, with whether it's test drives or taste tests or product involvement. They've been doing really neat stuff. Check out the CFL and you'll see how they're engaging their sponsors. Activations first. Make sure if they come to you and they say, you know what, things are tough, my budget's cut, we're going to drop the rights fees by this, or we're going to just cut activation and keep the rights fees where it are. Make sure they maintain the activation. Otherwise, that sponsor is just going to disappear very soon in the future. Next one, please, Dave. So now on to evaluation, the third of our three. I think we're doing okay for time. So evaluation obviously is that piece to see what's the ROI, the ROO, did this deliver on the objectives that we had. Part of the challenge here is figuring out what the objectives are. So here's first. So again, just like the servicing element, when we find this year over year, back since the study started, there's a huge disconnect between what we, properties or NSOs, say our sponsor satisfaction is and what they tell us. This is a really illustrative slide. So the dark green, the top one, that's your perception of how happy your partners are. And the bottom one, the light green, is their answer. So 0. Not a single sponsor in last year's sample told us they were very satisfied with the return on investment from sponsorship. 0. Whereas, and a third of them said they were somewhat satisfied. Whereas almost 7 out of 10, or more than 7 out of 10, almost 3/4 of properties told us that their sponsors were either somewhat satisfied or very satisfied. That's a disconnect if I've ever seen one. Next, please. We've also seen, not coincidentally, an ongoing decline in what's spent. This is the percentage of rights fees invested back in evaluation by sponsors. Had a little bit of a bounce back in 2013. You could argue that evaluations got less expensive because of syndicated studies, online tools you can use yourself now, Twitter analytics, these kind of things that are much less expensive. But we saw a big dip again in 2014, which probably is related to the result we just saw. And next, please, Dave. We also ask about pre-sponsorship evaluation. So pre-sponsorship evaluation is asking the sponsor if they did evaluate, what proportion of that spend did they invest pre? So you said, what does that mean? Well, that basically means we want to see if there's any sophistication in their sponsorship. It's not a perfect question. If you at least planned ahead of time, it's likely you set a benchmark. Likely you probably came across with some kind of method to put in place, maybe some survey, you did some analysis, you probably talked to your partner about what their objectives are. There's something going on there. This is a nice positive result. More than a silver lining, I'd call it a platinum lining around evaluation. So even though the spend's gone down, even though we know sponsors aren't so happy, at least the spend we are doing, we're doing a little bit better. Next, please. So what do we do here? What are the 5 things that we can do tomorrow? Again, and you're probably sick of me saying this, but invest in evaluation. Take a chunk of that budget up front and put it back in. Put some dollars towards, right? It could be 1%. It could be an intern's time to track stuff. You could hire 10 brand ambassadors the day of the event and have them go do surveys. Get out there, do something. If it's a big one and you've got the resources, go hire a market research agency to get it done, to evaluate it and get you some real data, do a pre-test and a post-test, and have some exceptional data to do. Really depends on how important it is to you, how much you want to renew that sponsorship, how significant the financials are to your organization, and make that decision. But definitely don't let it swing by without anything. The key point here is that even if that sponsor doesn't renew, if you have an evaluation, you have evidence of success, you can use that in your sales for other categories, to other potential companies and brands in those categories, et cetera, et cetera. So it has a high value thing going forward. Count the right things. So one of the things that a lot of us do is, oh my God, I'm supposed to do an evaluation, the national championships are over, go get some press clippings, or go see what our social media hits are, and people throw together this stuff of a bunch of clippings and hits that really have nothing to do with any objectives or defined stuff. It's better than nothing maybe, but don't do that. I mean, I've been part of a couple of evaluations recently where the evaluation was a deck full of pictures. I mean, it's look at, and it's got some logos showing, but it's got no information back to the brand of what it meant, right? So get something done that's got some level of analysis to it. Know your goal. So this is, again, that same meeting when you sit down to talk about activation. A lot of sponsors say, we're not sure, it's part of a bigger program. Make sure you nail down their goals, what they're trying to achieve. And if they won't tell you specifically, then go through their documents, what they do, come up with them and send it back. Say, here's our understanding of what you want to achieve from this. And please let us know if this is correct. This is what we're going to measure and show you that we're helping you achieve it. Get them on side. Don't take no for an answer, right? Again, just like the servicing one, make it someone's job, can be that same person. This is a great one for a talented grad school intern that's interested in research and is going to get some data to do stuff. It's a great one to even link in with a professor and get something done. You can do these ones relatively cheap, right? Or you can go super sophisticated if you want a national sample across the board. But get somebody involved, could be a volunteer, like Jean from the board of directors that's interested in it, that could be the person to make sure that it gets done and done properly, right? And then both benchmarks, 101 and evaluation. Don't evaluate against something you don't know where you were before. And so even if it's simple, getting that benchmark and making it happen.
Hey, Norm. Obviously, a big theme that you've got here is the reinvestment back into the servicing, the activation, and the evaluation. When I add up the numbers that you've got here, we get up to like around 35% of the sponsorship being reinvested. Is there such a thing as reinvesting too much? And at what point do you know when you're doing the right amount?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you're paying so close attention. So I've worked with a number of Canadian properties that are implementing various things like this. So the first thing is, and this is a great question, is that it's the range that's important. So if across your portfolio of sponsors, there's no way you're going to spend at the top end the 35%, to your point. But if you landed a really big one or a really big category that you've never had before, one of those blue chip ones I mentioned earlier, and you've got a chance to do it, and it's a $65,000 a year deal, but you just see huge upward potential, and you invest $25,000 back in that for a renewal that could be double or triple, I would say it's going to pay for itself, and history shows that. But that's a really strategic choice. To your point, if it's not a big one, you just spend 3 or 4%, 5% of it. So let's say it's a $20,000 one. You put $500 back into it. Just make sure it's done properly. You get some evidence. You make sure they're happy so that they do renew, in case there's no one else in that category. But you've done something. But it's really an important strategic choice. And if you track sponsorships over time, and there's studies, and we've done some that have done this, if a partner's happy, the fees go up, and the activation goes up. And so even if you may not see it in the rights fees right away, you're going to see more and more activation. They're letting your products know. As anyone on the call knows in sponsorship, that helps you sell in other categories, helps you drive forward. So it's a great point, and it's hard to sell to a board because you get this precious money. But if you can say this is going to have that value long term, obviously, how do you know? You can follow renewals down the line and make sure your marketing committee's happy with which ones you prioritize. That would be my answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Norm.
Okay, and with that, we're going to be joined now by Penny Joyce. Penny is the Chief Operating Officer at Diving Canada, and she's going to talk a little bit about their Fab 4 program and how that ties into their sponsorship goals. So Penny, over to you to set up a question for Norm.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Norm. Great information. Yeah, so I'd like to get some information on a program that Diving Canada has invested in that started last year, and we're in partnership with the COC through the NSF Enhancement Initiative. Just to back up a little bit for everyone on the line, diving is really a small participation-based sport, but we're a very high-performance sport. Lots of consistent international success. We've won 9 medals over the last 5 Olympic Games. So we have that performance success that we think is marketable, and we also have 2 televised international events each year, so we use those as marketable properties as well. So last year, looking at our marketability heading into the Olympics and the fact that we no longer have Alexandre Paty and his great success that really helped to bring a lot of visibility to our sport, we realized that we had potentially a very unique and special situation and opportunity. And that was the fact that we had 4 girls, Rosalind Fillon, Jennifer Abel, Megan Benfito, and Pamela Ware, who all are Montreal-based divers. They all dive together. They're 2 of them are 10-meter specialists, and 2 of them are 3-meter specialists, and they also pair up for 10-meter synchro and 3-meter synchro. And these girls, you know, while Alex and Emily Haymans were getting a lot of the spotlight, these 4 girls were really building up their international portfolio performance success, and their track record was pretty amazing between 2012 and 2015, winning 47 medals internationally. Not only that, but they're great ambassadors for our sport, really good, well-spoken ladies, very photogenic, fluently bilingual, get along as a really great group. Combined with their performance, we also felt that there was a lot of trust between the Federation, the National Office, the girls themselves, their parents, and their coaches. We have known the girls since they were quite young. So there was a really good chemistry between us. So we thought that we would have a good possibility to be able to go to these girls and offer Diving Canada to be their personal agents, because up until that point, none of them had agents. Jen had maybe, I could say, half an agent, not doing that great of a job, more of a PR person. So we were able to go to them and come to an agreement where Lawrence Basla, our marketing director, was able to become their personal agent as well. And I don't know if any other national sport federation has been able to do that, but we certainly saw that opportunity and we seized it. It took a lot of back and forth between the girls and the coaches and us and Lawrence, but we were able to come to a very good understanding. So with the performance, the trust between everybody, and as well as the upcoming Pan Am Games in Toronto, and knowing that we had a really great chance of winning lots of medals at the Pan Am Games, the home games, you know, a year out before the Olympics, that there was kind of a perfect storm brewing. And given all these factors, we could really, really help raise the visibility of diving and start having some sponsor conversations through the girls that would perhaps translate into some sponsorship revenue as well for the National Federation. So given that, we were able to sign the contracts with the girls, and I can't tell you how, I won't say how surprised we are, but with the money that we've been able to invest through the NSF Enhancement Initiative and the stuff that we've been able to produce, we had a photo shoot with them. We've produced a Fab4 website as well as a sponsorship sales package, and we've done media tours. And that, along with the acronym itself, has totally caught on. And the acronym is not just a play on the Beatles, but the F fits in nicely with Rosalind Fillion's last name. A is for Abel, Jenna Bell's last name. B, Benfito, for Megan's last name. And then we made the 4 a Roman numeral 4, and we shaped it as a W to give Pam's last initial in there. So with all the creative that we've designed, the media have totally grasped onto this concept, as well as potential sponsors. So it's really taken off. We were able to sign deals for the girls even before the Pan Am Games. I'm just looking at my notes here. We've been able to generate 8 deals already for the girls. The notable ones, off the top of my head, we've got a worldwide sponsorship deal for Jen and Pam with Visa, and we've got a deal for Rosie and Meg with BMW. So, so far, you know, our goals that we've set in advance are mainly around revenue generation, as well as increasing visibility for diving, and in those 2 main areas. But it's been very successful. Our 9 medals at the Pan Am Games were certainly well received by everyone. We won the medals early in the games, and we got a lot of great visibility out of that. And the program has allowed us to open doors for the Federation that we've never ever had before. So we've definitely been able to use our athletes to generate some new sponsorship opportunities for us. The other part of what's happened as a result of this program is that not only do the girls feel very well supported, but we're now all on the same page in terms of their scheduling and their competition plan. So we have kind of a seamless approach now to everything that they do. So we're saving a lot of time and hassle leading into the Pan Ams and the Olympics, because before we were dealing with athletes that had sponsors. So I guess now that we're through the Pan Am Games and we do have some doors open now, I'm wondering, Norm, and this might be relevant to the other sports, for some of us who have had success at the Pan Am Games, given that we now have a short lead-in to the Rio Games, do you have any suggestions on how we can quickly take advantage of the success with the corporate community?
Yeah, so, I mean, great story, Penny, obviously, and congratulations on building an asset. Maybe we did something last year that was helpful. And I think you've done a couple of things. One is engaging the athletes, and as you say, it's as much value to help them sign sponsors as it is to sign your own, right? I mean, then it helps them, as all those things you mentioned, train full-time, focus, etc. So to the specific question around moving from Rio towards Rio from Toronto, I think you've got a couple of energies, right? And the first one, as you said, is this group of four, celebrity status. They're kind of starting to build the equity that's in their brand and their name, the charisma they have, et cetera, et cetera. Toronto is a second energy where we've had a very successful games. I mean, many of us in sport, I'm sure lots of us on the call included, were concerned and worried that Toronto wouldn't engage the games. I personally worked for the Olympic bid, the 2008 Olympic bid in Toronto, and it was it can be hard sometimes in big cities, and it just was a huge, wonderful success. So that is there. The Canadian success is there. All those pieces are in play. So there's the two things then. I mean, from today's webinar, you've got the deals you have. You mentioned BMW. You mentioned a couple of others. I would work with them first of all to make sure that they're getting everything that they wanted out of those deals. I don't know what the time frame is on your deals, whether it's through Rio, or whether it's just around the Pan Ams, or it gives you a short term, whether it's longer. But strategically make sure that all those pieces are happening. You're helping them activate. You're evaluating the effectiveness, and with this kind of stuff and with diving, and as you know, I used to be on the board. I know the sport pretty well. There's a big social media following. There's a lot of fans. The athletes have a really prominent role in terms of their celebrity. You can start getting some data about what they're doing, maybe running a couple little surveys to see if there's any implications for the sponsors. Are the sponsors selling more cars or getting more following from what they're doing? This is a chance to get some evidence, because you had a mini mega event. It was in Canada, so host games obviously has a big benefit. And then the big show, the Olympics, are coming, as we all know, next year. So if you could take this opportunity to build that evidence, and then maybe the strategy is either A, do you try to do something around, and then B, do you say, okay, if they can perform at Rio, and if medals are possible, or really good outcomes and stories are possible, then we're absolutely ready to capitalize. And I know a lot of sports have had the situations where they've won a medal and they weren't ready for it, and they weren't set up in that leverageability category we talked before, where you're ready to help partners activate and get involved, and you're ready to evaluate and service what they're kind of providing. That would be the kind of a general answer. I think more specifically, that maybe is useful for everybody, more specifically to your case, is you've got personalities. And I mean, we study sponsorship a lot, and I just finished a deep analysis of the top 100 sponsored athletes in the world, right? And most of the top 100 are team sport athletes, so highly linked to their team. But if you dig into the top 20, most of them are individual athletes and celebrities, and sometimes from very minor sports, like a Usain Bolt. There's nobody else in sight, but he's there. So that's a different world, but the point is people love celebrities. People love personalities. So you've got an opportunity to help Canada get to know these 4 young women. I know you've got plans around potentially 4 guys, I've heard, in the future. And so there's these personalities you can build, and you get an Alexander Despatie or a Simon Whitfield from triathlon, and down the list we go, where you can create these people that are actually celebrities and can do very, very well themselves in sponsorship, and then also translate into sponsorship opportunities, as you know, for your national sport organization. So I think that would be the more of a specific answer.
Right, great. So in terms of evaluating success for the program, like mainly we've got about 8 metrics that we're using, and it's mainly around sponsorship dollars being brought in and media coverage. So is there anything else, like from all your research that you've been doing, that maybe we haven't thought about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can share with everybody, and Dave may send the link. We've got an article that came out recently where we interviewed a whole bunch of sponsors and identified 155 different objectives. I think the great thing here, you mentioned 8 deals. So you've got 8 contracts, you've got 8 sponsors. If you could come up with a list of the things that they would like to know, that's going to give you a pretty good portfolio of what sponsors of diving and divers are looking for. And make sure you've got some evidence. You know, you don't have to spend a fortune on research agencies, but if you can get out there and get ahead of the Twitter analytics and do social stuff, you get some media information. If you could do something around a particular event that follows, if you could talk to these sponsors and say, are we helping you? Are you selling more, whatever? Are you seeing a change in your brand? Are people talking to you about these athletes? What could we do differently? And then if you test something around a particular event or a particular launch or a particular competition, and know you host your own as well, is there something pre and post you can do relatively easily? Maybe that's an intern for the summer, as I mentioned, whose just job is to say, okay, we got this Fab 4. Let's go out there and see what's going on and measure and follow and track. And so you've got as much kind of artillery, for lack of a better term, for when you get that opportunity around Rio, or you get an opportunity around a renewal for a sponsor to increase or to get some attention. You've got 8 deals, so those contracts are a great place to start.
Yeah. So and the trick, of course, those 8 deals are for the girls, and that's led to 2 for Diving Canada, and more importantly, it's opened up a lot more doors for us. But and then the trick is, once the Olympics are over, it's continuing with the momentum and keeping the sponsorship on board in between Olympics.
Yeah, that's where get some data can really hopefully help with that discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And so I mentioned before that, you know, diving on the grassroots side of things, we just don't have the numbers. There's, you know, facility limitations and things like that, but we definitely need to improve that. We know that that's something that sponsors are looking for. So do you have any data or any suggestions on how we can use the success of this program and the fact that we're working with these sponsors and how we can leverage them to grow our sport at the community level?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot done in this. And so, I mean, you're in the same realm as, you know, American or Canadian football, where there's a big spectator following, but a very limited participation following, and the opposite of something like soccer, where the following for the high performance trails behind the participation, even though it's getting better. And so in those sports, it's kind of that first decision is, what participation are we trying to achieve? So I know you're under a lot of pressure. I know I was on the board, we did too, to make sure boards go in at new facilities, et cetera, and that's a governmental kind of discussion and a discussion with new facilities. But in those cases, we know very much that if you've got some stars like Alexandre was or these 4 ladies are, that you can help get that attention, and when organizations are deciding, or cities, municipalities, whoever are deciding to build new pools, that it makes it an easier to say, yeah, I know there's an insurance issue, and we know there's a cost issue, but it's worth putting in that board, which can help with your participation. But part of it can also be, you know what, we want to focus on building spectators and followers of our sport. And that's really what an NFL does. And their goal, I mean, they do a little bit of stuff around the CFL, they're trying to get more people to play, but their goal is to get people to spectate. And that's around, you see a lot of activations now around fantasy, a lot of activations around celebrity and following. And so someone may never dive, but if they're a fan and they're following these 4 girls and online, and I mean, there's lots of ways you can leverage celebrity, as you know, in positive ways, and maybe that's your goal. And so I think you would really look in the mirror and think, okay, what is our goal in terms of participation? Clearly, Sport Canada and others reward you for those numbers who are members. As you pointed out, that's a tougher, longer-term objective, but with the interest right now and the interest around them and the interest going to Rio and coming out of Toronto, if you can start giving for corporate dollars proof of engagement, they're less interested in if people actually participate, but if they're interested in following and can I get my brand through your assets, to the people that I want to reach. I mean, BMW is trying to sell cars, right? And you've got the 8, 9 other that now that you mentioned deals that you can look at, right? So that would be the answer.
Right.
So thanks so much, Penny, and just being cognizant of the time. And I think this conversation has led us to several really outstanding tactics that I think build into the Fab4 program. And that gives us a segue to talk about tactics a little bit more generally. And so, Norm, do you want to just delve into some of these general tactics and some of these things that our guests today can maybe start thinking about, the things they can do starting tomorrow morning?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So when we were planning this, Dave and Jean asked me to get as specific as we could. So, and all the things that I've been seeing and doing, et cetera, and a lot of you know this stuff. Here's 4 kind of things that we've learned and that I think have real interesting and potential for a lot of you. So we're going to talk about each of these. One is around branded content, which you might know, that's kind of what a sponsor and agency might call it, but you might know more as an ownable property. We're going to talk about those in a second. If you own your own property, and I mean, diving and Penny is a good example, they own their own major event that they can get their own sponsor for and leverage around and do what they want to do and not have all those limitations that others have, and there's some of the examples that I'll show. The female consumer. So we've known in a long time in marketing that there's been a big deficiency in really targeting male and not female, and marketers complain all the time of female products that there's not good places to go. We've seen a big positive shift in the results that I'll show in a second that really has high potential, I think, for NSOs. Third is around youth and youth-specific content, and again, sport, just like the female audience, has shown some really interesting improvements and something that you can really dig into. We'll show that in a second. And then, as you all know, everyone's struggling with how do you monetize and get into the digital world without undermining your traditional world, and where do the dollars come from. Got some things we can talk about that we've learned there that should help. So we'll go through these pretty quickly, and hopefully they're useful for you taking it away. So branded content or the owned property that I mentioned. Here we've seen a big rise in how much activation spend. So of that, around, just a hair under $1 billion is being spent each year in Canada by brands on their activation. We're now seeing it was the highest one at 17%. Was around branded content, and you've seen a general rise over time. So flip to the next one, Dave. So this, we then asked, I'll give some examples in a second, we then asked which one of all the activation tactics, and there's dozens that we ask about, drive the best results. And all 3 stakeholder groups, sponsors, properties like yourselves, and agencies, all said this is the way to go to drive ROI, creating branded content. Next one, please. So these own properties. So here's what it allows you to do. So there's lots of examples out there. I won't go through them in too much detail. You probably know a lot of them. So Nike High School Grand Prix, Intact Day on Skates, BMO Team of the Week, and the Ontario Lacrosse Festival are 4 that are just outstanding examples of a sport federation creating its own event in a relatively modest way. You're not talking about some major global property. It's locally focused. That's been very successful. It's been renewed by sponsors. Sponsors are happy. In particular, I'll talk a little bit about Ontario Lacrosse, and I just was fortunate to share a speaking session at the Ontario Sport Alliance with a member of their board, and he spoke after me and talked all about it. And it's an extraordinary story of how they took their local little provincial championships into a festival that's well into the 6 figures in total sponsorship, and it's become a really big deal for the sport. So there's lots of opportunities out there, and it allows you to create something that you have control of. So they packaged all their different levels, all their events, all their meetings, everything into this festival, and all of a sudden they've got something of value. When you break it up, had no value. So they're creating an asset, and the other 3 are all good. Next, please.
And as a quick note to everybody, in the appendix to the slide deck today, there are links to each 4 of these branded content ideas.
Thanks, and female. So here you go, and this is the big shift we've seen in terms of investments. And so at 17.3% targeted women may seem small, but it is an improvement. Next slide, please. And you can see there that over 2012, so in the landscape study, every few years we dig into specific things, and twice we've done the female sponsorship element. And so sponsorship that specifically target the female marketplace that brands told us was 5%, has now increased significantly. Still, the male is a larger focus. Gender neutral, which would be families or senior citizens or just individuals, gender neutral, etc., are the main one. But we can see that the female target is growing and growing and growing. And flip to the next one. And this is where there's a real opportunity for NSOs, because for the most part, we have significant female participation. Some, like Ringette or Figure Skate Canada, have majority of female participants. We have celebrities, we have stars who are female and allow corporations to reach female audiences. The example I wanted to show was Ringette's 50th anniversary. Ringette is a very small NSO, as you all know. They turned 50 a couple of years ago, put a lot of effort into it, built a really robust sponsorship program with a cross-country tour, a world championships, special events, all-star games, engaged the athletes of all levels, engaged celebrity female Canadians. Really, really well done, particularly given the limited resource base that they have, and attracted some significant sponsors. One example here is Volkswagen, who really activated and made it a really special event. Modest investment by Volkswagen, but really brings in something special for Ringette Canada. Next, please. Youth, so I'll go pretty quick here. So youth, this is again the demographic focus of a property. So Canadian properties, who are they focused on, and what are we trying to achieve? As you can see, the question mark in the middle, there's a lot of variability and variety around who we're trying to target, but a significant proportion are offering things around children and youth and getting sponsored on those things. Next one. This is another opportunity for us. And here's one I've just followed a little bit, which is interesting. And snowboard in and of itself has done a really exceptional job. In Snowboarding Magazine runs annual monster parties. If you ever Google it, just make sure you're not at work, because the photos may get you fired. But they've just done enormously successful ways of engaging youth, major sponsors, big activation spend, and it's a way to target young people. And a lot of you are in this. This is an event that's a Snowboard Canada event sponsored by Mazda, highly activated, targeted to youth. They're very clearly interested in that particular target, and a lot of you have those particular things. Next. So just to wrap up, because I only have a few seconds for questions, the last one is around technology. And we talked a lot about this last year, and you all know it. Reaching millennials, how do you activate that they find it interesting, etc., is a really hot topic. The biggest opportunities all three groups told us in the next 3 years in sponsorship is related to technology. That's very, very important. Next, please, Dave. Secondly, when we asked again those groups, what are the biggest changes coming to the traditional sponsorship models? By the traditional sponsorship model, I mean it's a property has some kind of offering that it packages out or is sought to, those pathways we talked about earlier, that a sponsor invests in to achieve objectives. A huge expected shift, and I wrote about this recently in Sport Business Journal, a big expected shift is around that media and digital and technology are now coming first. So some of the big brands are actually buying media time first, and then the selection of where they put it or pass it through is at the level of the property or the sport organization or the arts organization or the festival. So they're linking into something with a major network or a major online platform or a major online provider. And within that, they're then selecting. So the actual selection of the property, which you all care about, is moving. So not only is technology key to activation in the previous slide and a big challenge, it's also a potential change in the overall way in which we do sponsorship, which is really interesting and really scary, but also has a lot of opportunity for those properties that can really reach very specific audiences in special ways, like a lot of that you can. Here's a little thing from last year's kind of webinar, and I think you can just kind of read it there. Good. And the next one. So this is a study from University of Texas that AECOM, a major facility management firm, did, and this is really powerful stuff. 50,000 respondents. So there's two myths out there, and there's other research that supports this. One is that people only want to go to places, youth, we're talking millennials here, but people only want to go to places where they can get Wi-Fi. So they're not going to go to a stadium if it's not wired. They're not going to play sports because they can't get online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that they prefer to sit on, play on their devices as opposed to anything else. And this data from these 50,000 people this age showed that that's not the case. In fact, they choose to do that when there's not a better experience. So the reality is you're competing against, and for your sponsorship and getting spectators or participants, per the discussion with Penny earlier, you want to really provide a spectacular, memorable experience, and that's when they want to be able to share it. So the real difference between youth and people my age and older is they have a real penchant to share, but they still want to have the amazing experience. They'll still buy tickets to an event. They'll still purchase participant fees to go do an event. They'll still join a club, provided it's giving that experience that's something that's share-worthy. So that was the real kind of key thing out of it. And this is something where we, with our really engaged membership bases and clubs and athletes and training centers, etc., have an opportunity, challenging, an opportunity to feed into some of these changing structures that are happening in technology. Next. So just to summarize, 5 things, and then we can wrap it up. One is over service. I think we probably made that argument clear, and then the discussion with Penny really supported it, that you want to over service on all these elements. Invest back, assign a person, make sure it's being done properly, communicate, and that we're not, sponsors in Canada are telling us we're not doing our job. Be that platform. So be something that sponsors can activate around and do. Be open, be willing, share, introduce them to your sponsors, etc., etc., etc. Evaluate, even if it's a modest investment. Make sure you get some evidence going forward so that when the opportunities come of future Olympics, as we talked about in the Diving Canada example, you're ready and you've got some data, not a set of photos. You've got some data of how you can help a sponsor achieve their objectives, be they sales, brand, awareness, reach, etc. Own your own events and content. You saw the examples that we put forward. In Intact Day on Skates is a great one. In Intact and Speed Skating Canada, which I was involved with evaluating it in a project, is really interesting. And they'd gone through a brand change from a previous name to Intact, from ING Insurance to Intact. Wanted to just change. That was their whole point, was just to let people know and build awareness of the new brand name. They've been very successful in doing that. And that's the kind of thing that they wanted to do. So if you own it, you're able to help your partner want to achieve. And then you heard the stuff on youth and female. Have a look at those parts of your organization. Don't just get stuck on the male part, and think about what that offers to particular sponsors. Telling us they're spending there, and they're telling us that this is something that properties are focusing on in terms of their demographic. And Dave, I think that is it.
Thanks so much, Norm. Great bit of content to share with everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rest of the webinars in our series. Before I do that, a couple of things. One, housekeeping. For those of you who are downloading the deck, that should open up a window to do you want to download or not. But if you are having trouble with it, rest assured a link to the PDF will go out in the thank you email in a day or so. And then in the meantime, I'd like to turn it over to Jean. Jean, to offer some of your closing thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I realize we went a little bit over time today, but the material was extremely valuable. Norm, it's great to have the information that's really evidence-based that you bring to us. And having the real-world example of your success, Penny, is inspiring, I think, to the other federations, and very encouraging to all of us that the support is out there. We just have to make it happen. So I won't keep things long here. I just want to remind everybody that our next webinar is October 21st. Dave will get into a little bit more detail about that. As always, we're looking for your ideas, your questions. We want this to be useful to you. So please give us any feedback you want to. If there's any specific topics you want to dig deeper into, let us know through Dave. That'd be really great. So thank you all for participating on your own computers. And Norm and Penny, thank you very much for helping us out here.
Thanks, Gene.
Thank you.
And as Jean mentioned, to close this out, we have a few more coming up through the fall. We're working on a GNHST for NSFs, where a lot of NSFs are working with the challenge of ensuring that they minimize the amount of tax that they have payable. Working on some legislation updates for HR practices, looking at our events off the field of play, AGMs, meetings, that kind of thing. building an evaluation plan, we partnered with a great partner, Deloitte, who you may have seen is also a wonderful partner with the game plan announcement that you saw earlier today. Build on some of the work we did last year on philanthropy, about stepping to making the ask. In digital marketing, about using your own content, and we'll be working with Athletics Canada to talk about some of their successes and some of their incredible work on webcasting, among other things. So keep watching this space. There is more to come. Thanks everybody for your time today. We really appreciate it. Again, more will be coming in terms of a link to archived version of this on YouTube, as well as a link so you can download the slides. So thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate it, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.